Okay, so what is the talk scope? What are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to be learning about Mongo's query objects and how they can circumvent server-side password validation. Also, we're going to be doing a pretty sweet, in my opinion at least, interactive exercise. And basically the first part of it, we're going to be doing reconnaissance of client-side JavaScript to find API endpoints, and we're going to be basically looking at how the JavaScript basically interacts with the API, and we can kind of reverse engineer what the associated payload needs to be. Then we are going to be going on to part two and leveraging this payload that we kind of reverse engineered. We are going to be doing query object injection, and that is going to update all product reviews within OWASP's their Juice Shop application that we commonly leverage. So, yeah, and we'll kind of get into why. I mean, talking about updating all product reviews. Like, why would an attacker want to do this? And always, offense is the best defense. So let's learn about kind of put on our attacker hat, and hopefully you're really going to learn something through this tutorial. So anyhow, before we even get there, let's just do a brief recap on really what is NoSQL injection. And okay, so this is introduced when developers create dynamic database queries that include user supplied input or untrusted input. So as we went through in the last tutorial, I mean, one unexpected input type would be binary that a basically an attacker could pass in if the developer was blindly accepting that untrusted input and putting it into a MongoDB query. But now we're really going to be checking out something different, and this is a query object type that is coming in. So it's really a type of object, but it is special in Mongo, and we're going to kind of look into how this can kind of subvert some validation mechanisms. So query objects are very powerful. And of course, there's always other types of unexpected input that you can receive. And this is really why we want to focus on, of course, input validation, but also to make sure that the validation that we're doing is scoped by type as well. Not, in other words, we can't just do a regex kind of validation. We want to make sure that, say, if we're expecting only a string, okay, then we need to make sure that that's whitelisted and we do not want objects to come in. So anyhow, we're going to kind of get into some of the consequences if we do not do input validation by type. And yeah, so it'll be pretty interesting, as you will see with our discussion on query objects. So really, as a brief recap, okay, so this is the Mongo shell syntax right here, and both of these are. And developer kind of SDK syntax is very similar with how developers kind of will interact with Mongo. But anyways, we saw this last time, so we have an accounts collection, and we are just the developer here is just trying to find basically a username and that they are passing in something from the user that the user is submitting, and also a password value that the user is submitting. And the developer here is leveraging this as a validation that the password is correct and the username kind of matches the password. And if that's true, then the developer will be like, oh, cool, well, I will allow you to log in. So, but here's the thing. It's kind of like, well, what is this actually technically called? And if we look in the MongoDB, basically their documentation, we will see that the find method signature, which is right in here, this first item right here is called query, and this. So essentially, this item that we see right here is called a query object, which just matches to this right here. Now, a query object that can, yeah, as we just said, that can be leveraged to validate the username and password. Now, the important part to really think about is that query objects contain logic. So right here, this query object, I should just be, I'll just point to here from now on. Now, this is actually an and query. So find something, a username and password combination. So that's really so. basically all I'm saying is there is logic inherent in here as we see it, but also there are more granular query operations, and there are query operators that we will see very soon. So anyhow, before we kind of get into that, let's just do a brief exercise of just evaluating just like injection just issues. And I'm just gonna, sorry for this little highlight here, anyhow. Um, but here, just to kind of, before I pose the question, I'm just going to kind of recap on the BSON injection course. So remember, we had this in the previous course, and what happened was in the previous course was that validation issues with an underlying library could allow an attacker to inject username value and password value with unexpected characters. So one of the vectors was the attacker could possibly put in a new line character, and what would happen was is that this could subvert some of the input validation mechanisms that the underlying libraries, or one library in particular, was leveraging, and that basically would put a new line character into Mongo into a field that should only be scoped to binary. And because of that, that could actually cause a really bad denial of service condition. So, okay, so we saw that. But now, assume that the underlying libraries are validating everything correctly. In other words, username value and password value only accept types and characters that are allowed by the underlying library. So let's just assume that. How could one, given that information, how could one still attack username value and password value? And the hint here is that, and this is just kind of evaluating just injection risks in general, is that this is a certain type of injection that we're about to see, and really the hint here is that the issue of how this could be exploited is actually it's in front of you in here, the overall construct. So just think about it for a second. You can pause the video, and I will continue in a few seconds. So the answer here is nested query objects. So we know that this is a query object, okay? So what if username value would accept another query object inside of it as like a nested query object? And what would happen there? Okay, so imagine a nested query object, okay, that the user submits here and is inserted into password value. And imagine that query object returned true. So when the developer is doing accounts and trying to find a certain combination where a username is, say, admin, and this password condition, part of the AND query, results to true, this would actually, if developers kind of invoke it leverage this a certain way, this whole query would evaluate to true, and the developer would be, in their code, would basically say, oh, well, this is the correct combination, username, password, and the person can now be allowed to log in. So we're going to get into this because this might, I know if I would have heard it just like I just said it right now, it would have sounded kind of confusing, but I'm just kind of going to bring up things a couple of times, and yeah, we'll see it in more granular detail right here. So for example, imagine this password value right here was replaced with exists equals true. So this is query object injection, okay? So now check this out. So yeah, this is what we're doing. The attacker here is setting password value equal to another query object. And yeah, and this is called a query operator. Now, let's think about this as an attack vector, okay? So this is what the developer or the attacker is trying to do. So to subvert validation, to subvert the validation condition, okay, as we saw here. This is basically the validation condition, okay? So to subvert this, an attacker can try to inject query objects that evaluate to true. So this password part of the AND query would result in true. So if username equals admin, which is going to be true, and the password part is going to be true, if this is found in the database, both this combination, well, let me put it to you another way. So that find is going to look for a username with a value of true. I mean, I'm sorry, with the value of admin. My bad. And then the other part of the AND query is going to look at the password part. But this, instead of going to the database, this query object is just going to return true straight out of the bat or straight out of the gate, right? And then that will subvert that validation condition that we just saw right here. Okay. So let's kind of dig in a little bit deeper into these query operators. And so you can kind of see this a little bit more for yourself. And then you're going to be leveraging this knowledge to inject an application. So you're going to get your hands dirty a little bit, which is going to be great. So just bear with me just for a couple more slides. So what are some different query operators that you could potentially leverage when you inject this application that's about to come up? So there's comparison. Now think about this. Think about a field value that say was numerical, right? So this, and if you expected it to be a positive integer, then a greater than 0 would kind of be an attacker's way that they would probably go about invoking a true statement out of that field, out of the evaluation of that field. Okay, there's also logical. So not an empty string. An attacker can leverage that to kind of get that true that they are probably looking for. And also element. Now check this out. Exists is true. So so think about it this way. If we were back here and the password field actually exists, that would this part would evaluate to true. Okay, so that's another one that is kind of like a pretty bland query operator that an attacker can inject to make pretty much anything evaluate to true. And then here's a really interesting one is the evaluation query operator. And this is through where. And here's the thing, it matches documents that satisfy a given JavaScript expression. So it basically, Mongo actually whitelists that they're a lot less permissive. Let me just say it that way than they used to be. But now they just have basically a whitelist of certain JavaScript functions or expressions that you can invoke. Now, there are some ones in there that can have some pretty kind of do some pretty bad items from a denial of service perspective. And so, and we're actually going to be looking at this in the next tutorial. But just know that basically through the evaluation query operator, if untrusted input was passed into a given field, there could be remote code execution. Now, what about the comment query operator? Now, this is really kind of an interesting attack vector because, say, if untrusted input, well, here, let me just put it to you this way. If an attacker puts in a comment, like something like this, they pass this in, right? And they surround it as an object. So yeah, so basically the idea here is, let's just say an attacker put in a cross-site scripting payload right here, okay? Now this, when it would go ahead and get executed, the attacker basically could reflect their cross-site scripting payload within some logs that, say, an admin would look at through a web browser. Now, if an admin looked at that, they would have the attacker essentially has remote code execution on that admin's browser. So that's kind of another thing sometimes with logs and log injection that can be kind of a pretty bad thing because whoever's viewing that is probably in a privileged context. So, all right, let's get into the exercise. So here's the scenario. You are a juice shop owner and you are trying to degrade the reputation of your competition. Now, so once again, we're putting on our attacker hat to really learn about how these things occur. And here's the thing, you want all pre-existing reviews on this website to be altered and display your message, which would probably be probably say something like, "Hey, this sucks," or "This product sucks," or whatever. So, but here's the interesting thing: I'm bringing up this scenario to really show the financially motivated attacker. Now, when people and usually when people are very serious, that is kind of the underlying motivation is usually a financial one. If somebody is very serious about attacking a given web app attacking really anything on the internet. And so, in other words, you're not just thinking about these like script kiddies or whoever who just have some like "you've been pwned, you suck, wah ha ha ha." Like they're not just trying to like inject some like stupid message or do something really excuse me, silly or trivial. There are certain people that really try to degrade business functionality. So, for example, I mean some of the attacks out there where one company will develop a bot that will search for somebody's pay-per-click ad, okay? And they will go and they will just click on their ad over and over and over to try to drain their ad revenue. So kind of having fake reviews that are negative is an attack that it might look kind of, when I just said something about, hey, and we're going to do an attack vector where you update all the reviews on a site, that might sound really trivial on the outside, but actually this can have some pretty big business impacts. So what are the attack steps that are going to occur for that you basically are going to be stepping through? Well, number one, we're going to be evaluating, or you are going to be evaluating first, client-side JavaScript code to find a given API endpoint that is going to update these reviews. Now, if you aren't like a JavaScript coder or whatnot, it's I'm hoping that what I give you is going to be relatively simple to kind of deduce what's going on. But if you don't have kind of a coding background, it's totally cool, and I will show kind of at the end kind of how you can kind of step through these issues. And then after you kind of find this API endpoint, you're going to then leverage query object injection to update all the reviews on the Juice Shop site. Okay, so it's kind of where we're at. Now, before I'm basically going to step you through how we do the exercise setup, and I'm going to show you like step by step outside of the screen that you are looking at right now. But basically, just to kind of briefly summarize the steps, you're going to be basically spinning up a Docker container, okay? And just know, I mean, that app has some vulnerable code in it, so just know that whenever you spin this up, right? So anyhow, outside of that, you're going to be going to the app in Google Chrome, and then we're going to be going into Chrome DevTools and finding Juice Shop's kind of main basically the main logic. And then we're going to be searching for a patch method. And that patch method is going to have basically everything that it's going to bring up 6 results. And as you step through everything that is associated with all the items that come up in the find for patch are going to be related directly to this exercise. Okay, and then after that, you're going to be submitting a you basically are just going to submit a product view. Or that's kind of confusing. Basically, you're just going to be submitting a product review, and we're going to be leveraging that as a template to leverage in the attack. So we'll get into it a little bit more in a second. But okay, so let's do this. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the command. Feel free to skip this if you don't want to see this. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. This is going to bootstrap the environment. Okay, so the server's listening. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up that server or open up that app. So here is Juice Shop. And also, just please know before you do this in the real life, kind of go ahead and click on login and just sign in as a normal user. So, and we'll go to that a little bit more in a second. But anyhow, so I just did a control click and I opened up DevTools. Then I am going to find I'm going to find that, go into dist and go into juice shop main or min.js. And this has all the main logic. If you go to the bottom here, you can go ahead and click on pretty print and that'll make it all nice. And then I'm going to do a command F on Mac and I'm going to find patch. So these 6 items that this will highlight all are related directly to this example, to your assignment. Okay, so now, okay, so let me just 1 second here while the video just pauses. Okay, so here, what we're going to do now is we're going to keep that kind of that dev tools open, and I'm going to basically just make sure that the networks tab, it's recording all network traffic, which I see it is. Then I'm going to click on an arbitrary product, and then I'm going to submit a product review. So I'm just going to say like, this product is horrible, okay? All right, and I'm going to submit it. And then after that, I'm going to go find that within the network panel, and it is this bottom kind of request right here. And I see it's a put, and which kind of makes sense within this one context. We're updating a product. Okay, so I get that, and then I'm going to go ahead and option click here, and I'm going to go down into copy as curl. And that might not be option, that might be control. But anyhow, just know that some of the things that I just said were option, might be control, and vice versa. But I think you could kind of, figure that out. So anyhow, the item there is, so once we copied that curl command, we can then, after we go through the source code and whatnot, we can basically insert that and we can alter that curl command for the items that we found, and that then we can execute that curl command and then update all the product reviews on the website. So, as I said, if you can, before you kind of go through those steps, like let's just go back here. So I am just going to go actually into localhost, and for you to log in, which I should have kind of showed this in the beginning, just go ahead and click, before you go ahead and set up your environment, just go ahead and click on login, not yet a customer, and just put in the information right there that you need, and then just kind of log in, and then do all of those steps. And that is vital for when you paste it, when you do that whole curl command template, that will have in a correct kind of header in there, an authorization header that you need. So anyhow, okay. So, all right, so let's kind of continue on here. So here are all the items for you. If you just kind of want to go right now and kind of go through it. And yeah, and you can also look below the video and you will see all of this within the show notes, and you can just directly copy and paste all this stuff. Okay, so getting into the assignment. Now, leveraging basically, this is the assignment, kind of just straight off the bat. Okay, so leveraging the code. Okay, and just remember, all the relevant code is just linked to patch. So if you just do a find for patch, everything that you need should be there. Okay, so leveraging the code, the curl template, and the query object injection items that you basically just learned, update every review on the site. So just know that the patch method that you are going to be searching for, that has all the correct API endpoint information for updating all the reviews on the site. So, and from looking through all that code, you can kind of deduce what the correct payload should be that you will then paste into the curl template. Okay, so go ahead and do that. And if you want some hints, if you're kind of stuck, I will just kind of do them one at a time. So go ahead and pause the video because I will give away some hints. Okay, so I'm about to start. So hint number 1. focus on the ID field for the query object injection. Okay, so that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of a part of what the payload should look like, or one of the fields within the payload. Now, if you are having issues basically seeing or kind of deducing what that payload should be, then I will kind of give that within the next hint. Okay, so here it is. So the payload should have this overarching structure where there's an ID and a message, and it's really up to you to kind of to put something within X. And you know what? I know I showed some different query operators, and I gave one example. Okay, but maybe kind of try a couple others and see how those work for you, just to kind of make the exercise even more interesting. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the solution. All right, so when we did that find, and if you had some issues kind of going through this, it's funny because I initially said, hey, this should be kind of simple, but to be honest with you, I mean, when I was first starting out, this might have been a little bit over my head, just to be completely transparent. So no problem if you weren't able to get it. But let's step through this together. So in that source code, as I said, we search for patch. And then what we see here is that this patch method is passing in an ID and a message. So that's kind of how we can kind of get a hint at what the payload should be that we are going to insert into the curl template. Then we go ahead and construct the payload. So I just did exists true, okay, but you can try a bunch of other ones, okay? And the message, hey, I can't believe how sour this juice was. Like, if I was a prospective customer and I saw that on the site, I would be running away, right? Okay. Now, the next part of the assignment was to find an API endpoint URL. So once again, search for patch in this item. This came up and we see an R, and R is catenated with this reviews. Okay, so what is R? Well, we look up here and R is this item. So now we're kind of seeing basically the path that we need to leverage. So it's this plus reviews right here. Okay. And then we go ahead and here, basically I put in that curl template and I updated this part to reflect what we just saw. This used to be, I believe it was a put, so I changed that to patch to reflect the correct the REST method. And then I go down here, and then the only other item was, okay, so we see where the data binary is right here. And what I did, I just kind of pasted in the payload. So if we go, I'm just going to kind of show that in action. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the curl command. Then I'm just going to paste it into the browser's, basically the URL bar, just to kind of get rid of any special kind of the new line characters and other stuff. I'm going to go into the terminal and submit that curl request. And we don't get an error back, so that's kind of a good sign. And then go into the browser and go into localhost, and we're going to go ahead and click on a review and see if it updated. And boom! See, and notice even the admin is talking saying bad things about their own product. So just kind of an interesting exercise right there. Cool. So all right, did that up. Now, what are some quick takeaways here? Well, attackers always profile, not always, nothing is ever always, but a good attacker will profile JavaScript, client-side JavaScript, to deduce admin functionality, okay, or functionality that isn't immediately available within the application. So, meaning like a user might not necessarily invoke a given piece of logic or hit a given server API route. But attackers will kind of look at this and and kind of find and harvest these API endpoints and then see if they can go ahead and try injecting them or interacting with them in various ways. So that if you're a developer, I mean, just as a heads up, I would really go through any client-side JavaScript and look for any legacy API endpoints that might still be in that in some of the JavaScript code, but maybe since it's like a legacy thing, maybe it's not as secure from from an API vantage point. Okay, and usually, admin functionality, it usually is still within the client-side JavaScript, okay? And it's on the server to kind of validate that a user is an admin or not. But an attacker can, say, leverage API endpoints that contain admin in them to figure out, okay, that this is an admin, a sensitive endpoint, and then try to inject them and hyper focus on them. So just kind of know that as well. And here's the thing with input validation. Okay, so a lot of times, you know, I've seen it where certain developers will leverage regular expressions as just say, their input validation, okay, to make sure certain characters are there or that or they whitelist certain characters, okay? But the while I will say that that is a good start, you must also validate the type that is coming in as well, okay? And we're in a very upcoming tutorial that's coming up very soon. I'll be showing joy, and that is an example of a validation library in for JavaScript that you can leverage server side as well. And in joy, you can actually validate the type. So for example, in our previous, I mean, what we kind of saw here is like even if you were leveraging a regular expression, okay, well, the problem here was really that the attacker was passing in an object, okay, and so we would need to validate via a regular expression to certain characters, okay, and also make sure that whatever is coming in is a string, okay, and it's not a query object. Okay, so we would validate on an object type. So anyhow, yeah, that's it, and we'll kind of get into some more validation items next time. So thanks for joining me.